let's talk about what kind of price we're going to do. So we already know the opportunity cost for Saudi Arabia and for the US. So this basically is just like the cost of doing it. So from a business standpoint, right? If you know the cost of what you're making, this kind of shows you how much you can charge for something, but you also know how much it's going to cost you. So this is going to be pretty useful information when it comes to trading. So what we're going to do here is we're going to input the numbers that we calculated earlier. And so for Saudi Arabia, this was 0.25 corn, and then this was 2 corn, this was 4 oil, and this was 0.5 oil. Okay. So basically, this is like the minimum cost for each one of these countries to make something. So the minimum cost to make oil for Saudi Arabia is 0.25 corn. So basically, that is the cost. So if Saudi Arabia is selling oil, okay, and they want to sell their oil, they need to at least sell the oil higher than 0.25 corn. And that just makes sense because from a business standpoint, if it cost you 25 cents to make something, you better charge more than 25 cents. So on the flip side here, the US is buying oil, okay? And they can also make oil for 2 corn. So basically here, from another business standpoint, you have the option. You can either make it or you can buy it. If you make it, it's going to cost you 2 corn. If you're going to buy it, okay, you got to think like, well, is it cheaper to buy it than to make it? That's the key. And that goes for anything that you're doing. Like if you go to the grocery store and you're looking at the fresh fruit or the chopped fruit, usually the chopped fruit is more expensive. So you're like, okay, do I want to put the time in to cut it myself because it's cheaper? Or is it better for me to just buy it already chopped up? And that's what's happening here. Do we make it or do we buy it? So for the US, their decision is based around 2 corn. So if the price of oil were 1 corn, they would do it because they can make it for 2 corn, but they can buy it for 1. So that makes sense. If the price were 1 oil for 3 corn, then the US is like, well, why would I buy it for 3 if I can make it for 2? So at that point, we would not be trading this one right here. So US would not trade. So the opportunity cost chart here that we created shows you the minimum price that Saudi Arabia is going to sell and then the maximum price that the US is willing to pay. The minimum price for Saudi Arabia and the maximum price for for the United States. So let's switch over to corn. Okay, so the question here that you need to answer yourself is, who is making corn? And we're going back to the comparative advantage. Who makes it cheaper? The US makes corn cheaper, so the US will produce corn. Okay, so this number right here is telling you the minimum selling price for corn, 0.5 oil. Now, this price right here is telling you the maximum buying price for corn. Saudi Arabia will not pay more than 4 oil for 1 corn. Okay, so the least that Saudi Arabia will be willing to sell oil for would be 0.25 corn. The most the US would be willing to buy oil for would be 2 corn. And that's how you solve it. Once you figure out the opportunity cost, you can definitely figure out the minimum selling price and the maximum buying price. Easy. Okay? So if the price gets out of hand, okay, if it's not in between here, then we will have a situation where we would not be trading. And if we're not trading, then we're not going to have these gains from trade. Now, the gains from trade is where a country or a person can consume more than it can produce as a result of specialization in trade. So basically what happens here is, let's say Saudi Arabia were producing at point C. So they have 60 barrels of oil and 10 bushels of corn. That is their current production. But because of trading, they could sell 20 oil and receive 20 corn. All right, and you're wondering, well, is this a good price? Well, 20 corn and for 20 oil, that's basically 1 oil for 1 corn. So let's figure out, is that a fair price? Over here, we see 1 oil, and that is in between here. It's above 0.25 corn, and it's below 2 corn. So yeah, we will benefit here. Okay? So this is a good price. Now, this enables Saudi Arabia to reach point D, where oil consumption is now 40 and corn consumption is now increased to 30. Let me show you why this happens. So basically what's happening here is you have point C here, all right, and they sell 20 oil, and because they sell 20, they're going to gain 20 corn. So now they're at point D. And as you can see, point D is outside their production possibilities. This is outside their PPF. So the gains from trade basically is saying that you can consume beyond your production. Okay? So that's the whole point of the gains from trade, is that now you can eat more than you produce. You produced 10 corn, but you can eat 30. That's how it goes. And it all because of this good price right here. As long as the price is in between here, we're going to be good to go. And that's where we mutually benefit. So let's do a quick example here. Let's look at the US and Mexico. All right, so looking at this graph here, can you tell me who has the absolute advantage in shoes? For that one, absolute advantage is who can make more. And here you could see that the US makes 10,000 shoes and Mexico only makes 8,000. So who has the absolute advantage in shoes? That would be the US. Who has the absolute advantage in fridges? Well, the US can make 40,000 and Mexico can make 10. So that would be the US as well. The next thing would be finding the comparative advantage. So to find the comparative advantage, we're going to need to set up our chart here. So we would need Mexico, the US. I always put my countries on the left, always. And then we have shoes, and we have fridges. All right, so the US or Mexico can do 8,000 shoes or 10,000 refrigerators. Or the US could do 10,000 shoes, 40,000 refrigerators. So if you did it this way, you can definitely see who has the absolute advantage. The next thing is finding the comparative advantage. To do that, we need Mexico and the US. But now we're trying to find 1 shoe and 1 fridge. So we have 8,000 shoes for Mexico, and we want 1. So we'll do 8,000 divided by 8,000, and that'll give us 1 shoe. You do that to one side, you do it to the other, so you'll go straight over, then you'll do 10,000 divided by 8,000. And if you did the math here, this will equal 1.25. So 1 shoe for Mexico is 1.25 fridges. For the US, we have 10,000 shoes, so we would divide by 10,000. That equals 1. So 1 shoe is the same as 4 fridges. So 4 fridges here. Now let's do fridges on for the other one. So 1 fridge for Mexico would be 10,000 divided by 10,000, 8,000 divided by 10,000. So that will equal 0.8. 0.8 shoes. And then if we were to do it for the US, we want 1 fridge, and currently we have 40,000 of them. So we need to do 40,000 divided by 40,000. That equals 1. So 1 fridge is how many shoes? So we'll do 40,000 divided by 10,000. We'll do 10,000 divided by 40,000. Notice that the 40,000 is the same for both sides here. All right. So this will equal 0.25. So looking at this chart here, who can make shoes cheaper? So Mexico can make 1 shoe for 1.25 fridges, and the US can make 1 shoe for 4 fridges. So Mexico is going to be the one that makes shoes. And then over here you can see that the Mexico can make 1 fridge for 0.8 shoes, or the US can make 1 fridge for 0.25 shoes. So therefore, the US is going to make fridges. So comparative advantage in shoes, Mexico. Comparative advantage in fridges, that's going to be the US. And so even if you have an absolute advantage in both goods, right? So like here, you will never have a comparative advantage in both. It is impossible to have a comparative advantage in both goods. All right? Even if you are the best at washing dishes and cooking, it is better if you were to do what you're better at, such as cooking, and then let someone else do the dishes. That's where you're really going to have the gains from trading. Okay? In the next video, we'll talk about some trade barriers. I'll see you there.